HMS Hermes was the last ship built of the Centaur class light aircraft carriers. She was laid down by Vickers Armstrong in Barrow-on-Furness on the 21st of June 1944 as HMS Elephant. However, her construction was suspended in 1945 while still being on the slipway. However, in 1952, work was resumed to clear the shipway, and finally the hull was launched on the 16th of Feb 1953. The ship remained unfinished until 1957, when work then started up again. She would then enter service on the 18th of November 1959, but not as HMS Elephant, but the name of the last ship of the class that was to be cancelled, Hermes. But she wouldn't be exactly the same as her sister ships, however. She would be fitted with a fully angled flight deck, deck edge elevators, and steam catapults. When she was finished and brought into service, she resembled the heavily reconstructed carrier Victorious than her actual. Hermes would displace 23,000 tons at standard and 28,000 tons at full load. She would be 198.12 meters between perpendiculars and 225.20 meters overall. She would have a beam of 27.43 meters at the waterline, and this would extend to 43.90 at the flight deck, as well as having a draft of 8.5 meters. She would be propelled by 4 Admiralty 3-drum boilers, producing steam for 2 geared steam turbines, producing 76,000 horsepower, going through 2 shafts, propelling her at 28 knots. She would have a maximum range of 7,000 nautical miles at 18 knots, or from Portsmouth Naval Base to San Carlos Water in the Falklands, something that might come in handy in a few years' time, eh? However, she would need to be replenished every 5 days roughly for food for her 2,100 crew and the replenishment of her AVCAT for her aircraft. Her weapons loadout would consist of 10 40mm Bofors cannons in dual and single mounts. These could fire out to 3.86 nautical miles with an RPM of 120 rounds, with a muzzle velocity of 881 meters per second. These guns could train plus 90 degrees and depress to minus 5 degrees. When she would be finally commissioned, she would be fitted with some radars, and these are as follows. 1 Type 984 Early Warning 3D radar, or the dustbin radar, operating in the S-band, or what we know in NATO frequency bands is Echo band. This was designed to be used against large, high-flying aircraft. The radar had a typical range of about 180 nautical miles, but this fell to as short as 40 nautical miles for small, low-flying aircraft. Type 275 fire control radar for the 40mm guns, operating in what's apparently a dubious Echo band. This has a maximum range of 16 nautical miles. And finally, Type 974 navigational radar, operating in the India/Juliet bands, with a maximum range of 25 nautical miles. Her air group would consist originally of Supermarine Scimitar strike aircraft. These were 16.84 meters long, with a wingspan of 11.33 meters and a height of 5.08 meters. They would be capable of 640 knots at sea level, and would have a range of 1,237 nautical miles. They would also have a service ceiling of 46,000 feet and a rate of climb of 6,751 feet per minute, which would take about 6 minutes and 39 seconds to get to altitude. The scimitars would be armed with 4 30mm Aden cannons with 160 rounds each, 4 hardpoints for 4 1,000-pound bombs or 4 AGM-12 bullpups, AIM-9 sidewinders, or 16 2 to 3 inch unguided rockets, or essentially 4 per hardpoint, or everyone's favourite Red Beard nuclear bomb. Sea Vixen combat air patrol aircraft. These were 16.94 meters long, with a wingspan of 15.54 meters and a height of 3.28 meters. They were capable of 600 knots at sea level and had a range of 686.4 nautical miles on internal fuel tanks. They would have a maximum altitude of 48,000 feet and would have 6 hardpoints for 4 Mantra rockets, each with 18 missiles each, 4 Red Top or Fire Strike air-to-air missiles, along with 2 AGM-12 bullpup air-to-ground missiles, or 1 everyone's favourite Redbeard freefall nuclear bomb. Fairy Gannet anti-submarine warfare aircraft. Now, these aircraft were 13 metres long, had a wingspan of 16.56 metres, and a height of 4.19 metres. They were turboprop aircraft with 2 counter-rotating propellers. They would have a maximum speed of 269 miles per hour with an endurance of 821 nautical miles. It would carry 2,000-pound bombs, torpedoes or depth charges, or even some rockets. These aircraft were large, lumbering aircraft, a bit like a flying snail. Westland Whirlwind search and rescue and transport helicopters, not to be confused with the fighter. These are 12.71 metres long, with a height of 4.76 metres and a main rotor diameter of 16.15 metres. They had a top speed of 95 knots and a range of 219 nautical miles. But this was cut short, or in half per se, when the helicopter was in the hover mode. They could also carry a 1 Mark 30 or Mark 44 torpedo, or even depth charges in place of a dipping sonar if it was not carried. Hermes would spend a couple of years working up, getting pilots to be qualified with landings and taken offs from her deck, whilst preparing for operations. On the 16th of November 1962, Hermes was cruising off the Pembrokeshire coast in Wales, when one of her helicopters, carrying 2 members of Parliament, Lord Windham and the MP for Loughborough, John Cronin, back to the aircraft carrier, which they had been visiting, but this was travelling back to Royal Naval Air Station Brodie. It, however, crashed off St David's Head, while Cronin and the helicopter's 2-man crew were saved by another helicopter. Lord Windham and the RAF officer being carried as passengers were unfortunately killed. On March 2nd, 1964, the Admiralty stated that Hermes would be operating the new F-4 Phantoms being brought into service. They were quoted as saying, "Phantoms will be operated from Hermes, Eagle, and the new aircraft carrier when it's built. Our present information and advice is that the aircraft should be operated from Hermes after she's undergone her refit." This seemed optimistic, as most sources believed Victorious was the smallest carrier then in commission that would be modified for the Royal Navy's F4K versions of the Phantom, and could have realistically operated them. An F4 would have been catapulted from Hermes, but at a much lower weight, i.e. less fuel, than from, say for instance, HMS Eagle, and the combat air patrols would be 25-50% less duration than from Eagle. Reduced from 2.5 to 2 hours to 1 to 1.5 hours, and only partially compensated by refueling while airborne, it was optimistically believed Hermes could replace its Vixens with Spey-powered F4s on a 1-to-1 basis, i.e. 11 and 12 Phantoms per se to 7 to 8 Buccaneers, while Phantoms built for the Royal Navy were modified in ways similar to F-8 Crusaders for the French Navy, improving deceleration on landing, and modifications which were not entirely successful. Hermes' flight deck was too short. Her arrested wire gear, as well as her catapults, were not powerful enough to recover or launch F4Ks, even though they were slightly lighter, more economical and higher performance than their US Navy counterparts. The Phantom trials held on Hermes in 1969 and 1970 proved this, though in the views of the Ministry of Defence, the Dennis Haley, the carrier could operate the most modern aircraft, but in too small numbers to be effective. While it was clear that claims that the F-4 was not safe for use on the US Navy's Essex class carriers, or that 31,000-ton carriers, this was rightly rejected by the Civil Lord of the Admiralty, Lord Hay. It was clear that Hermes was not a viable substitute for CVA-01, but the programme was politically and financially impossible, a case of which being the best enemy of the good. However, in 1966, a review indicated that Hermes was surplus to operational requirements, and she was offered to the Royal Australian Navy as a replacement for HMAS Melbourne. In 1968, Hermes took part in a combined exercise with the Royal Australian Navy, during which the carrier was visited by senior Royal Australian Navy officials and officers, while the Australian Navy's A4G Skyhawks and Grumman S2 trackers practice landings on a larger carrier. The offer was turned down due to the operating and manpower costs of a larger carrier. Hermes was then subsequently serving as one of the 4 Royal Navy strike aircraft carriers, mainly in the Indian Ocean, and then finally in the Med until decommissioned in 1970. She could have seen action against the Egyptians when Egypt closed the Strait of Tiran to Israeli shipping in May 1967, when the UK and US contemplating forming an international fleet to open the straits by force if necessary, but the UK unfortunately backed down. From 1968 to 1970, her air wing would have consisted of 7 Buccaneer S-2 strike aircraft from 809 Naval Air Squadron. These are 19.33 metres long, with a wingspan of 13 metres and a height of 4.95 metres. They had a maximum speed of 670 miles per hour at a 200 feet elevation, with a maximum service ceiling of 40,000 feet. These aircraft would have had a range of 2,000 nautical miles, and they carried 4 hardpoints under the wings for 4 Mantra rocket pods, either 2 AIM-9 Sidewinders, 2 AS-37 Martlet missiles, or 4 Sea Eagle anti-ship missiles, as well as various guided bombs, laser guided bombs, as well as everyone's favourite Redbeard or WE-177 tactical nuclear bomb, as well as 2 Turtle Doves and a partridge in the pear tree. 12 Sea Vixen FAW-2 aircraft from 893 Naval Air Squadron, 4 Gannet Air Early Warning 3 aircraft, as well as 1 Gannet COD-4, both from 849 Alpha Naval Air Squadron, 5 Wessex HAS-3s from 814 Naval Air Squadron, and 1 Wessex HAS-1. These were 20 metres long with a height of 4.83 metres and a main rotor diameter of 17.07 metres. They would have a top speed of 115 knots with a cruise of 106 knots. They would have a range of 310 nautical miles, but this range was decreased by half in the hover mode. And finally, these aircraft will have a service ceiling of 12,000 feet. When the decision was made in the mid-1960s to phase out fixed-wing carrier operations from Hermes, she was then slated to become a commando carrier for Royal Marine operations, similar to the concept for the US Navy's LHAs. Therefore, Hermes was docked down in No. 10 Dock in Devonport Dockyard between 1971 and 1973, undergoing conversions to her arrestor-wise, steam catapults, and the 3D radar was removed. Landing craft and berthing for 800 troops was added, and her air wing became approximately 20 Sea King helicopters-ish. By 1976, the Soviet submarine threat became apparent, and though NATO pressure, a further mid-conversion was performed to Hermes to become an anti-submarine warfare carrier to patrol the North Atlantic. Hermes underwent one more conversion with new capabilities, with the addition of the 12-degree ski ramp added in Portsmouth between 1980 and 1981. Now, these facilities gave the addition of operating the Sea Harrier, and this refit would also lengthen the ship by 1.7 metres. Her air wing would now consist of 5 Sea Harrier FRS-1 fighter aircraft from 800 Naval Air Squadron. The Harrier was 14.2 metres long, with a 7.6 metre wingspan and a height of 3.71 metres. It was capable of speeds of 635 knots with a combat range of 540 nautical miles. They were armed with 2 30mm cannons with 130 rounds each, 4 underwing hardpoints for either 4 Mandra rocket pods, AIM-9 Sidewinders, AIM-120 AMRAAMs, R550 Magics, Alarm anti-radiation missiles, Mantlet ARMs, Sea Eagle anti-ship missiles, a variety of bombs, a WE-177A nuclear bomb, along with 2 drop pods or a reconnaissance pod. 12 Sea King HAS-5 anti-submarine warfare helicopters from 826 Naval Air Squadron. This aircraft is 17.02 metres long, 5.13 metres in height, and had a main rotor diameter of 18.9 metres. This aircraft was capable of having a cruising speed of 112 knots with a maximum range of 664 nautical miles. It could be armed with 4 MM4 or Mark 46 Stingray torpedoes, as well as depth charges. As well as the refit, the electronic suite would also be upgraded with a Type 965M early warning radar operating in the Delta band. Now this radar would replace the dustbin radar, and this would have a maximum range of 200 nautical miles at 45,000 feet. This was also integrated with the ship's ESM fit called UAA-1. In addition to the radar upgrade, the ship would receive a weapons upgrade, although some might say it was a bit of a degrade, as it was fitted with two quad Seacat launchers. These were capable of Mach 0.8 out to a maximum range of 5,000 meters, and this system was a platform guided weapon system. And, well, from most accounts I've heard from gunners, they weren't that great. Unfortunately, Hermes was due to be decommissioned in 1982 after the 1981 Defence Review, which would have actually made the Royal Navy considerably smaller. But luckily, something called the Falklands War broke out, and she was made flagship of the British forces, setting sail for the South Atlantic just 3 days after the Argentines invaded the Falklands. She sailed to the Falklands with an air group of 12 Sea Harrier FRS-1 attack aircraft of the Royal Navy's Fleet Air Arm, as well as 18 Sea King helicopters. A few weeks after sailing, more aircraft were flown or transported via other ships to replace some of the losses and augment the task group. Hermes' air group then grew to 16 Sea Harriers, 10 Hawker Siddeley Harrier GR3s of the Royal Air Force, and 10 Sea Kings, after some of the helicopters were dispersed to other ships, as well as troops of the SAS and Royal Marines. As she was the Royal Navy's largest carrier, she was considered too valuable to risk close into the Falklands due to the possibility of Argentine Air Force attack. Her Harriers therefore operated at the limit of their endurance range and were very successful in keeping the enemy aircraft at bay. The air group at the height of the Falklands conflict would consist of 16 Sea Harrier FRS-1s from 800 Naval Air Squadron, 5 Sea King HAS-5 from the 826 Naval Air Squadron, 5 Sea King HC-4s from 846 Naval Air Squadron, 10 Harrier GR3s from No. 1 Squadron Royal Air. After her return from the Falklands conflict, Hermes entered a much-needed 4-month refit to her propulsion and electrical systems, as well as a thorough cleaning and repainting. When this was completed in November 1982, she embarked stores and performed workup exercises. She then took part in the NATO exercise in the North Atlantic and Mediterranean as a commando carrier. In the autumn of 1983, she took part in her last exercise, Ocean Safari, when she reverted to the carrier strike role, embarking 12 Sea Harriers, 10 RAF Harrier GR3s, and 10 Sea Kings. After this exercise, she called into Devonport for a minor refit and therefore into maintained reserve in Portsmouth. In 1983, there was a proposed sale for the aircraft carriers Invincible to the Royal Australian Navy, and this was cancelled following the Falklands War. An offer was made to sell Hermes and a squadron of Sea Harriers to Australia. However, the new Hawke government decided against purchasing a replacement for HMAS Melbourne. Hermes served with the Royal Navy until April 12, 1984. On this day, she entered Portsmouth with a reduced crew under her own steam, flying the White Ensign for the final time as a sea-going ship. In April 1986, Hermes was towed from Portsmouth Dockyard to Devonport Dockyard to be refitted and reactivated and sold to India, recommissioning and sailing as the INS Viraat in 1987. In September 1993, the engine room of the ship was flooded, putting the vessel out of service for several months. The vessel was back in service in 1995 and was fitted with a new search radar. Between July 1999 and April 2001, the ship completed another life extension refit, expected to extend the serviceability until 2010. This refit upgraded the propulsion systems, added a package of sensors to sound emergency alerts, and introduced modern communication systems. In addition, a long-range surveillance radar, weapon systems, and a new hangar with fire curtains were installed. The ship underwent a 4th refit in Indian service from January to August 2009 at the Cochin Shipyard in Kochi. The refit was expected to ensure she continued service in the Indian Navy until 2015, and the ship went through exercises in the Arabian Sea for a month and a half before being deployed to the Gulf of Aden. Navy officers later reported the carrier might be kept in service until 2020, as 2 indigenous aircraft carriers seemed to be likely to be fully operational by then. On the 12th of July 2011, the ship arrived at Cochin Shipyard for a short refit scheduled to be completed in 2 months, and should also be repainted. The Indian Navy indicated that the ship could again remain in service until 2020, provided that there are still Sea Harriers available for shipborne operation. On the 2nd of November 2012, the ship arrived in Kochi for the first part of a major 2-phase refit. In this first phase, the hull was cleaned, probed for corrosion, worn hull plates were reinforced and received with a fresh coat of corrosion-resistant paint. The carrier sailed for Mumbai for further upgrades to her machinery before rejoining the fleet in September of 2013. The refit would enable her to serve throughout 2016 and was a final major upgrade before her decommissioning. In August-September of 2015, the ship underwent a short refit to reinforce her hull and inspection before her participation in the International Fleet Review in February 2016. However, by 2013, Viraat's age and cost of maintenance prompted the Navy to begin the process of obtaining the Defence Ministry's clearance for her decommissioning. In December 2014, a review board was established to determine the ship's continued life service. In February 2015, the Navy announced plans to decommission the ship in 2016 and begin the process to obtain Defence Ministry clearance for the carrier's decommissioning. In July of 2015, it was announced the ship would be transferred to the government of Andhra Pradesh for conversion into a museum ship for the cost of about $3 million, and the Chief Minister of Andhra Pradesh confirmed the same on February 8, 2016. By April 2016, however, the plans had apparently fallen through. On the 23rd of July 2016, Viraat sailed from Mumbai to Kochi for the last time under her own steam. By then, she had spent a total of 2,250 days at sea and has steamed a total of 1,094,215 kilometers. At Kochi, she underwent a month-long deactivation in preparation for decommissioning. During this period, her boilers, engines, propellers, and rudders were removed. Deactivation was completed on the 4th of September, and the carrier was towed back to Mumbai on the 23rd of October for her formal decommissioning ceremony. Viraat arrived in Mumbai on the 28th of October and was laid up. On the 6th of March 2017, she was decommissioned. After Viraat's decommissioning, her weapon systems, operational equipment, had been removed by mid-2017. She was an old girl. She served the countries she was in very well, and it's sad to see her go. Here's to HMS Hermes. Thank you very much for watching this video, everyone. I hope you learned something new today. If you have, please remember to like, comment, subscribe, and if you'd like to see more of what I do, you can follow the Discord channel to see what's coming up next, and if you really want to, you can also support me on Patreon if you really would like to. There's a few perks with that one. But, as always, take care, have a nice day, I shall see you soon.